Hello, and welcome to Breast Cancer Conversations, a podcast brought to you by survivingbreastcancer.org. I'm Laura Carfang, breast cancer survivor and founder of survivingbreastcancer.org, a nonprofit organization providing community, education, and resources to empower those diagnosed with breast cancer and their caregivers from day one and beyond. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Breast Cancer Conversations. If this is your first time tuning in, I would love to give you a huge welcome. I'm glad you're here. And if you're a longtime listener, welcome back. I'm so glad you're part of the SBC Breast Cancer Conversations family. Today, we have another amazing episode with guest Judith Fitzgerald. Judith is a 14-year breast cancer survivor and passionate patient advocate. Her website and company, sistersforprevention.com, her podcast and YouTube channel is dedicated to support those newly diagnosed with the disease. Her focus, similar to what we do at SBC, is on education. She focuses specifically on diet and lifestyle strategies to reduce the chances of breast cancer recurrence, as well as support the primary prevention of the disease. In 2019, Judith lobbied Congress for a women's health initiative to fund primary prevention clinical trials for women's cancer. She has served as a Congressional Directed Medical Research Programs consumer reviewer and serves as an advocate on primary prevention vaccine currently in a phase 1 clinical trial at Cleveland Clinic. She is also the author of a book, A Teacher's Journey, What Breast Cancer Taught Me. Judy is an advocate for the NIH, NCI, and a Koman advocate in science. She is a passionate patient advocate, speaker, supporter for primary prevention of breast cancer. She lives in West Palm with her husband, John, and 2 sons and 4 grandchildren.
Cancer makes you do kind of crazy things you wouldn't do. I said to my husband, this can't be right. How is this doctor got this vaccine sitting on a shelf in Cleveland? I just went through a year of HELL, and this can't be true. So I have to find out.
Welcome to the conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Laura. I appreciate your time, and I also appreciate everybody at that is in the advocacy work, because sometimes it's a little overwhelming.
Advocacy can certainly be overwhelming. It's not like you just wake up one day and decide, hey, I'm going to become a patient advocate. Can you tell me a little bit about your own diagnosis and how you got into the work that you're doing currently?
Yeah, I was diagnosed right before Christmas 2008. And I received the call, like we all do, that there was an irregular finding in my mammogram, and I needed to proceed with the biopsy. And I'd been down that road 10 years before, and so this was by my local hospital, and I had a connection at Dana-Farber in Boston where I'd had a benign biopsy 10 years prior. And unfortunately, but fortunately for me, my sister-in-law was presently being treated, having been diagnosed 2 months before me. So although my surgeon was no longer at Dana-Farber, she had the whole team set up. And so it was a very easy transition for me. And I'll put a plug in here for second opinions and, listening to your own intuition, because had I only gone to my local hospital, what they found was an in situ cancer, but I had invasive cancer that went undiagnosed, which was found when I went for my second opinion. So I speak to so many patients and they say, well, I can't hurt my doctor's feelings to go for a second opinion. And I'm like, well, your doctor's not God, first of all. And, it's not, no one's infallible, and do yourself a favor and do that.
It's almost like we're entitled, and it's our right to get a second, third, fourth opinion. And, not just from a diagnosis perspective, but at the same time too, making sure that you have that comfortable relationship, whether it's with your oncologist or your surgeon or someone in the medical field who you feel has your best interest, going forward as well. I think a lot of times just knowing the personality of, what is important to me. Is it, getting, different implants or reconstruction done? Is it having the most minimal invasive surgeries as possible? So really understanding the person and understanding what's important to them as you're making these treatment decisions.
I just lobbied actually in Tallahassee for the right to get, particularly one with dense breasts, I'm not going to get off the track here, but the right to have more diagnostic testing And had I not had the diagnostic testing, the sonogram was what discovered the invasive tumor on the total opposite breast. So
Wow.
that's really important for women to know that, too, is besides getting a second opinion, is if you have dense breasts, you really need to insist on getting more diagnostic testing done.
Exactly. And that's such an uphill battle, I feel, because, 50% of women don't have dense breast tissue, right? And so, having a mammogram is perfectly fine and a great and excellent modality
Mm-hmm.
for detecting any malignancies. However, for the other half of us that do have the dense tissue, the mammogram modality isn't strong enough, I would say, to discern, what is like white that you see on the x-ray versus the white that you see, in the cancer clustering. So I struggle with that because, even as someone who's been diagnosed with breast cancer, I had what I call like a double lumpectomy. I'm sure that's not the technical term. But I still have my breast tissue for the most part, and I'm still going to get mammograms. And interestingly, they say I'm not high risk and I get a mammogram. And I'm like, I should really be getting ultrasounds or MRIs because,
Right.
I have dense tissue and I had breast cancer. But sometimes it's so hard to advocate for yourself when you're half naked in a blue Johnny. So that's the other half of it too. You feel so vulnerable.
Yeah, not a good time to do that. And I don't know why it's such a struggle to just have that. They know there's enough evidence to show that. And I had a 3D. When I did it as well, I had the new 3D mammogram. So I had the best technology at the time. I'm sure they've improved it now, but I don't know why it's such a big deal. It's about $300 to get a sonogram, and why the insurance companies can't get on the program, I don't know. But we are lobbying. We are lobbying. So
Tell me about that quickly. Like, what does lobbying entail?
well, I did that actually. I did it last month, and I've done it in the past. I've done it on Capitol Hill, actually, not in Congress, but at the representatives' offices. But basically, so the bill for more diagnostic testing for women, entitled diagnostic testing, is state by state at the moment. And so we went to the Florida State House to try to get that in the accepted in Florida. And if we get enough states to accept it, then what we're hoping to do is then go and lobby in Washington and say this needs to be a national mandate. We know that this is saving women's lives. It needs to be a national mandate, but we're starting at the state level just because other states have kind of gone ahead of us. And I actually was invited to do that by, I recently became an advocate in science for Koman, and they set up the whole lobbying trip. But in the past, I've done my own. I did my own in 2018, and but that was a whole different project.
Tell me a little bit. So after you've been diagnosed with breast cancer and kind of went through this journey, how did you start Sisters for Prevention?
Well, I had no genetic predisposition to breast cancer. I'm the first one in my entire family, on both sides of the family, to even have any type of cancer. And so I have a chemistry degree, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, all those years in the chemistry lab, all the years I spent in the computer lab, maybe I need to find out why I got this so I can. And also I was obsessed with, well, I got it, but there's got to be a way that I can train my body to prevent it from coming back. And so I kind of went at it from an educator's perspective, and I started researching everything I could find on preventing breast cancer. And of course, we all know diet and lifestyle, which if you go to my website, sistersforprevention.com, that was my initial focus was, what can I put in my body that is going to help my body make this not happen again? Because my body betrayed me once. I don't trust it not to do it again.
Yeah.
So
That's such a common feeling too, right? Where we feel so many times I hear stories of women who are like, I thought I was doing everything right. I was eating healthy. I was dieting, exercising, eating my fruits and vegetables, balanced diet. And still this happened to me without a genetic predisposition. So, this I think is a common story. What has your research shown to be helpful in terms of preventing recurrence or
Well,
reducing the risk, I should say, of recurrence?
well, I was told by my medical team, exercise. And I have to submit of all the things that I found out, I was eating healthy. I was not eating organic. I was basically had a meat-based diet with fruits and vegetables. I thought I was eating healthy, but I wasn't really, when I looked at it, avoiding or reading labels as much as I should have, and avoiding. And when I was teaching, I love my students. When I was teaching, I was the cookie teacher. So if you forgot your snack in the morning, Mrs. Fitzgerald had a closet full of cookies because that's what I ate for my morning snack. And so I thought I was doing the right things, but I really wasn't doing the right things. And so that became my mission of Sisters for Prevention was, well, I'm going to educate other people. And so I actually just did I was part of a NIH NCI Prevent program presentation where I presented what I learned as a patient, and I created what I call the Wheel of Wellness and all the things that I did in a very simple form. And two basic things that I learned, which were really important, was reducing my sugar intake, which was huge. I basically gave up sugar. Secondly, was reducing my meat intake, which now I almost don't really even like it anymore. And third was eating organic. I didn't really know the importance of eating organic when you can afford it. And back to what you can do is there's a clean 15 and the dirty dozen, which the Environmental Working Group puts out every year. So if you can afford to buy just the top 3 worst pesticide contaminated products, which are berries and fruit, which we all love, then the rest you can sort of work around it. But unfortunately, the use of pesticides has not gotten better; it's gotten worse. So, and that's sort of when I talk to patients, I'm like, first of all, as you know, when you're diagnosed with breast cancer, you're like a deer in the headlights, and you're like, okay, so don't put any more pressure on me. It's like I feel so badly when I talk to patients. They'll say, "What did you do?" And I'll say, "Well, listen, you take one day at a time, okay?" And so that's when I created this Wheel of Wellness. I said, pick one thing this month, pick a second thing next month. But then I also did a lot of research in supplements, and that's kind of a Pandora's box because you can read. And I go to a lot of prevention seminars, and you can get really in debt from following every supplement that works. But again, I tell patients, pick 1 or 2 things. Like the first thing my doctor told me was turmeric and vitamin D. And that was kind of a no-brainer. And I never knew that you should have your vitamin D level tested. I lived in New England, and when they tested my vitamin D, I basically didn't have any vitamin D. Which, we all know is a vitamin, but it's also a hormone, and it's been proven, right, to be protective against cancer. So anyway, that's
such a good point too. I'm in New England as well. And, literally I just had a whole bunch of blood work done for just routine checkups and monitoring. And the feedback I got was like, start taking more vitamin D and up it to 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day, just to start getting that boost, because we don't get a lot of sun up here, and it is such an important part of our overall function. So I totally concur.
Well, the other thing too that I found from my oncologist, because I actually had just, when I was diagnosed, purchased a condo in Florida, and I was going to retire. And what she said to me was, sunscreens are amazing. Melanoma is a big problem, but we should spend 20 minutes every day in the sun without sunscreen, because when you put the sunscreen on, you don't get the effect of vitamin D. And that's something I didn't do. But I wasn't an outdoor person anyway. But yeah, there's a lot. And the other thing was melatonin, which was, that's kind of coming up more and more now. But at the time, I just stumbled upon a nurse's study that talked about nurses that work 3rd shift, and because they weren't getting enough sunlight, were low in vitamin D, were not producing melatonin. So mean, some of these things are like, I think our bodies always had it in the past because we would different lifestyles, but now and now we have rising rates of breast cancer. So there's got to be something happening there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this is so educational, and I hope everyone goes to visit sistersforprevention.com to learn more about, the health and wellness benefits that you've been researching and, sharing on your blog and podcast and on your website. So that's wonderful. I always joke, and I'm not sure if you know about this about me. I know some of my listeners do, but I was a vegan before being diagnosed with breast cancer. And prior to that, I was a strict vegetarian for 10 years, then became a vegan. My boyfriend and I were just living this amazing, healthy, what I thought, quote unquote, healthy lifestyle. And I remember after being diagnosed, and it's kind of funny now because the more people I talked to, they were like, were you ever scared that your boyfriend would leave you or anything like that? That didn't even cross my mind, right? Like I just called him and I was like, oh my God, I have breast cancer. Like, oh my gosh. He's like, that's it. We're going out for steak. It's just like kind of one of those funny things. I didn't quite go that far, but he now definitely eats everything. And then I've definitely incorporated more, pescatarian type of diet. But again, to your point, like you think you're being healthy and now without going down a rabbit hole, just wondering, gosh, should I have too much soy? Or because maybe I wasn't being as healthy as I thought, was I eating too many carbs and pastas because I was avoiding, meat and other, protein sources, et cetera. And so, it's not to be critical of ourselves, but it's just one of those things where like, we're doing our best and there's not really an answer sometimes for why one person would develop breast cancer and somebody else not. So it's a mystery that we should not beat ourselves up over. But since we've been diagnosed, it's kind of like, what are these healthy steps now that we can take to, prevent recurrence? And I do think exercise is such an important component of that, especially, I'll talk personally. In my case, I'm hormonal positive with breast cancer, triple positive and HER2 positive. And so, I'm on all these hormones to ensure that I'm not producing estrogen. And estrogen is such an important part of our body function.
Right.
And so, what is it that, when we're forced into medical menopause and, gaining weight and changing, all of these hormones and chemistry makeup of our bodies, it's the least we could do is, do some toning and lifting weights to make sure our bones stay strong, getting 30 minutes of cardio a day just to keep your heart healthy. And, I was listening to, some morning inspiration that I do just as part of my morning routine. And they say, this morning it was, if you're spending 8 to 12 hours a day at your job and you could love your job, what are you doing for yourself? And the least you could do is like take 30 minutes to do something for yourself. And I thought that was so important because I work all the time and I do love my job, but I need to pull myself away from the computer. I need to move my body. It helps, decrease the pain that I have with my joints. It just makes me feel better to like take those deep breaths and not clench my teeth when I'm like, in critical thinking mode.
Right.
But so important. So I appreciate those insights.
Well, we're leading more and more stressful lives. That's the thing. And so you really like the whole thing about meditation. I never did it until I was diagnosed. And it was, in my experience, that was such a key part of my year of recovery. Was I would basically put on my headphones, go out in the patio, and I said, I would like put a sign up, 30 minutes, I'll be back. But Bella Ruth Naspar, I have a link on my website. She does a really good, it's picturing your body eating up the cancer cells. Like go to a really nice place and, picture your T cells, picture your hypothalamus producing. And to me, it was like, yeah, my body's really doing that, and then back to the diet thing, the thing that concerns me, particularly, I have 3 little granddaughters, 2 are vegan and 1 loves milk, is that if you're going to have dairy, it's got to be organic, grass-fed dairy. And that wasn't the case when we were children. It was when I was I was in the 50s, 60s. They were not giving the animals all these hormones to produce more milk and so forth. And so that's something that another soapbox of mine is that, our children I'm worried about our children.
Yes.
And as a fifth grade teacher, I never thought about it until this happened to me. We'd be in the teacher's room talking, and I would say to my colleagues, why are the fourth and fifth grade girls getting their menstrual cycles? Why are fourth and fifth grade girls developing breasts? And I'm thinking, like, I was in ninth grade, and a lot of my friends weren't even, and I think it's because their diets are so full of artificial estrogen that this is what's happening. And and that's what I worry about too, in addition to the breast cancer advocacy work, which I guess they're hand in hand, but I really worry about our children, because if we don't do something, I think they're going to have more difficulty than we've had, and we haven't had it that great.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, that's that kind of societal complex, right? Like you have these corporate industries or, food industries, and, we want the perfect looking strawberry. We want the biggest, most plump, beautiful tomato. And, all of our, breads, cereals, milks are pumped with like extra hormones, right? And so there's a trickle down effect that I think does lead to more disease. And you're absolutely right.
Well, the other thing, we have this child obesity problem, and I will admit I taught in a private school, and my students did not have the healthiest diet. I'd see them come in the morning with their Dunkin' Donuts and so forth. However, I do think that the growth hormones they're feeding the animals are somehow getting into our children, who are making them have a weight issue, even though the diet plays a role. I think that there's some connection there, and I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, but I just think that there's so much that has to be looked at.
And you're raising excellent points, right? And I agree. This is more just peer-to-peer conversation and things that we're observing. But if anything, for those listening, these are some of the questions we might just want to start asking ourselves, right? When you brought up reading labels and, just kind of being a little bit more cognizant about what's happening around us. And so I appreciate that. Now, you're also doing some really exciting work in breast cancer. If I could ask you a little bit about kind of this hot topic I'm hearing from the Cleveland Clinic, who is doing some phase 1 trials around a prevention vaccine for triple negative breast cancer. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And you've been instrumental in kind of stewarding some of this work. I would love to hear from your perspective, the ins and outs of what's happening and kind of this exciting novel development.
Well, in the same 2010, as I'm Googling how I can prevent my disease from coming back, it was what I call a God incidence, when I stumbled upon a video of Debbie Wasserman Schultz from Florida, who herself is a breast cancer survivor and BRCA1, BRCA2 positive patient. She had met a doctor in Cleveland, Dr. Vincent Toohey, who had been working for 10 years on a breast cancer preventive vaccine and had not been able to get the funding. And so she had brought him before Congress, and his paper had been published in Nature magazine, one of the most highly regarded research magazines. And he'd gotten an award for the research. And he was presenting before a small group in Congress for the funding. And very sadly for all of us, he did not get that earmark, did not get approved. So he didn't get the funding. So, when you had breast, I always say cancer makes you do kind of crazy things you wouldn't do. So I said to my husband, this can't be right. How is this doctor got this vaccine sitting on a shelf in Cleveland? I just went through a year of HELL, and this can't be true. So I have to find out. So I called his office and left a message. He didn't have a secretary or anything. I left a message. And the very next day, Dr. Toohey himself called me. And I'm like, okay, so tell me what is going on here. And he said, listen, we're not ready to change the treatment paradigm into prevention paradigm. He was an immunologist, not an oncologist. And so he had discovered that breast cancer cells express a protein called alpha-lactalbumin. And the higher they express that amount, the more aggressive the cancer. And in the mouse model that he created, when he created an antigen vaccine targeting alpha-lactalbumin, all of the mice had no recurrence. The cancer disappeared and they had 0 recurrence. And that was what he published in the paper. Now, to get that to a human trial, I would find later, would take almost 10 years. So I said to him, well, come on, what can I do? I said, I'm really, at that point, I'll be honest with you, I always tell him, he just passed away, which I can't talk about. Get really upset. But I said, what? I'm just one person. And he said, listen, we need a grassroots effort. He goes, I'll help you whatever I can. Why don't you come to Cleveland? Look at the lab. Talk. He had 4 people that work for him. That's it. And he actually was in the Learner Research Institute, which is the teaching part of the Cleveland Clinic. So his lab funding, he had to come up with every year. So he was just writing grant after grant after grant after grant. And so I went to Cleveland. My husband and I were actually going to a wedding at Notre Dame, which was fortuitous. And he spent the whole day with me, took me all around the clinic, and I was sold. I have a really cute picture I could share with you of the 2 of us when we met in 2010 in his office with t-shirts that said prevention is the cure. And that was his mantra, prevention is the cure. So the next 6 years were just an uphill battle. There were 5 women, which we called ourselves the champions of the pink vaccine. And I was so grateful that before Dr. Tui got really ill, we recorded a video with him, which is on my website, kind of journaling what happened. And we each did our own fundraisers. Key people were Laura Frank and Leanne Best in Cleveland. They created a national movement called Breaks for Breasts. They own auto body shops, believe it or not. And they kept his lab going. And I mean, I would raise, several $100s, several thousand, 10,000, whatever. The thing about Dr. Tui was if you gave him 10 cents or you gave him $10 million, he always treated you the same. And so we kept going, and he kept getting turned down. And so I said, there's got to be something wrong here. So I started taking classes. I went to the National Breast Cancer Coalition Project Lead, and I met Ann Fonfa and a bunch of really advocates. That are my friends to this day. So Ann said, would you consider doing the DOD review? And I'm like, sure, why not? So I did it. And then I came back and I said to Dr. Tui, I know what's wrong with your application. You don't have an oncologist on your application. You are an immunologist and accepted in your field, but you need, and so hence in came Dr. Bud. And in the 5-year lapse of that time, which again, I call a God incident, they discovered in the lab by getting tissue samples that triple negative breast cancer cells in vivo, which is in the lab, which means they're live cells, had a high response to this vaccine. And so when the grant was written, it was written so that phase 1A, which we are in the middle of right now, would be an adjuvant treatment for triple negative breast cancer to prevent recurrence. And 1B would then be the prevention arm, which we are just now recruiting for. And sadly, Dr. Tui passed away in January. And going to AARC this week and hugging Jen, we were not allowed. I was not allowed. I'm on the vaccine team. There's 3 advocates on the team. We were not allowed any contact with the patients. And he wanted so badly to be there when she got that first injection. And because of conflict of interest, was not allowed to, as I was not allowed to. We had a bottle of champagne ready to go. But so when I met her Monday, we just hugged and cried for several moments. And I said, he is up there in heaven, just having the party of his life. So that's what happened. But it literally took 20 years for this technology to get into the clinic. We call it bench to bedside. And thankfully, Justin Johnson, who just became Dr. Justin Johnson, worked for Dr. Tui for 30 years, literally, on this project. And so he's very able and willing to continue this. But I just, wish he was here.
Thank you for sharing that story. I know it's, such a challenging topic, right? When you're so close to somebody and they so recently passed, but then leaving that legacy, I think, is really powerful. And so to be able to come onto today's podcast and share this story, to honor Dr. Tui, and then to know that his legacy is living on through your work and the work of his lab, I think is incredible. And hopefully, I'm sure, is giving so many people right now inspiration that there is hope for not just recurrence, but also prevention.
Dr. Tui also had an ovarian cancer vaccine and a monoclonal antibody for ovarian cancer, which actually now, through the NCI Prevent program, they are humanizing those two, because it took us 6 years to humanize the breast cancer vaccine. And COVID really was not our friend, because some of the components came from Europe and there were delays and so forth. And so Anixa Bioscience, who actually has the license for the breast cancer vaccine and is working to get it to phase 2, also has the license to the monoclonal antibody for ovarian cancer, as well as the ovarian cancer vaccine. So he left his legacy very well planned. I don't know, that's not the right word. He left the legacy in good hands, shall we say. And it's going to happen. But we have to make it happen. We can't let this not happen.
I couldn't agree more. Judy, thank you so much for spending time with us today on Breast Cancer Conversations. And thank you, everyone, for listening to our show. I would like to acknowledge that all of the information on our podcast are from personal experiences and are not a substitute for professional medical advice. You should always contact your medical care team. Our podcasts are made possible because of donations from listeners like you, so please feel free to make a contribution through survivingbreastcancer.org/donate. And there are so many ways to get involved with our nonprofit and our organization, not just through listening to the podcast, but through all of our virtual programming. So you can check out all of our lineups by hopping over to survivingbreastcancer.org/events. And as always, all of our programs, services, and resources are absolutely free. Thanks again, and keep on thriving.